My name is Ava Carter, and I am 32 years old. A year ago, I trusted the wrong people. I believed in love, in family. I thought my husband, Ethan, and his sister, Zara, wanted the best for me. I was blind. Now, I sit in a courtroom, watching the two people I once cared about facing the consequences of their actions. But before I tell you what happens next, let me take you back to where it all started. I built my company from nothing. Late nights, endless meetings, deals that almost fell apart. I fought for every inch of success. But not everyone thought I deserved it. My husband, Ethan, inherited 30% of the business through our marriage, and his sister, Zara, owned 19% from a family investment. Together, they held 49%, but I was the majority owner, the final decision maker. And that drove them crazy. Zara had always wanted full control of the company. She believed she was smarter, more deserving. Ethan just wanted money and power without putting in the effort. I should have seen it coming. The way they whispered behind my back. The way Zara always smirked when business discussions didn't go her way. Then one day, everything changed. I received a letter from my lawyer. At first, I thought it was some minor business document. But as I read through it, my stomach twisted. It was a legal notice confirming the transfer of my 51% shares to Ethan and Zara. I never signed those papers. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages, my signature staring back at me. It looked real, but I knew it wasn't mine. They had forged my signature. A wave of nausea hit me. They had stolen my company, my life's work. I clenched the letter, my pulse pounding in my ears. They thought they could take everything from me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with.
I didn't waste time.
I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer, David Langford, a man I trusted with everything. David, I said, barely keeping my voice steady, I just received a notice about my shares being transferred to Ethan and Zara. I never signed anything. There was a long pause before he spoke. Ava, this is serious. If these documents were processed legally, overturning them won't be easy. I need to see them. I'll be at your office in an hour, I said, already grabbing my car keys. Before heading to David's office, I stopped by my house, our house, though I was starting to feel like a stranger in it. Ethan was sitting in the living room, lazily flipping through his phone when I stormed in, holding up the legal papers. What the hell is this, Ethan? I demanded, my voice sharp. He looked up, feigning confusion. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me. I slammed the papers on the coffee table. You forged my signature to steal my company shares. His face flickered with something, guilt?
Panic?
No, it was something worse. Amusement. Ava, you're overreacting, he said smoothly, sitting up. There must be some mistake. I clenched my fists. Don't lie to me, Ethan. He exhaled dramatically, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Zara and we just thought it would be better for the company if you weren't the only one in charge.
You're always so stressed.
You needed a break. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. A break? They wanted me out. I'm taking you to court, I said, my voice cold. His amusement disappeared instantly. Ava, be reasonable. Lawyers, lawsuits. It'll just drag things out. Why not just talk it over? Over dinner.
With Zara.
Let's settle this like adults. A deep unease settled in my stomach. Ethan never suggested compromise. Not unless he had a plan. Still, I needed time to gather proof before taking legal action. If dinner would buy me that time, I would play along.
Fine, I said.
Dinner it is. Ethan smirked.
Great.
Tomorrow night at Zara's. He thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming. At David's office, we examined the forged documents. These are damn good fakes, David muttered, scanning my signature. They must have had a corrupt notary involved. I gritted my teeth. Can we prove it's fraud? David nodded. We'll need solid evidence, email trails, bank transfers, anything linking them to this forgery. Once we get that, we'll go straight to court. I clenched my jaw. I was going to burn their little scheme to the ground. And if I knew Ethan and Zara, they would slip up. Tomorrow night at dinner, I would find out exactly what they were up to. I just didn't expect them to try to kill me first. The next evening, I arrived at Zara's house for dinner, dressed in my most composed expression. Inside, the air smelled rich with spices, roasted meat, and something else, a scent that sent a strange shiver down my spine. Something wasn't right. Ethan greeted me at the door with his usual fake charm.
Ava.
Glad you could make it. I smiled tightly, stepping inside. Zara stood by the dining table, a smug smile on her face, pouring wine into 3 glasses. I'm surprised you agreed to this, she said, eyes scanning me like a hunter sizing up prey. I shrugged, keeping my tone neutral. I figured it's best we handle things like adults. Zara smirked, but I caught the glance she exchanged with Ethan. They thought they had already won. The table was set beautifully. A large plate of roasted chicken legs sat at the center, glazed in sauce. Beside it, bowls of mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, and wine glasses gleamed under the chandelier light. Sit, Ethan said, gesturing to my chair. I did, but I didn't touch the food. I knew better than to trust anything from these two. I needed proof. As they served themselves, Zara placed a particular chicken leg onto my plate. Try this one, Ava, she said smoothly. It's the best piece. A chill ran through me. I knew that piece was special. I picked up my fork, pretending to inspect it. The sauce smelled slightly off, faintly nutty, but masked by the spices. My stomach twisted. They knew about my peanut allergy. They weren't just trying to make me sick. If I ate this, I would go into anaphylactic shock. My throat would swell. I'd struggle to breathe, and I'd be too weak to make it to the court hearing. They were trying to get rid of me, without leaving any evidence behind. I forced a smile, lifting my fork. But just as I was about to take a bite, I accidentally knocked my wine glass over.
Oh.
I'm so clumsy, I gasped. Ethan sighed. Zara rolled her eyes. I'll get a towel. As she turned away, I quickly switched my plate with hers. By the time she returned, I was already cutting into my chicken, pretending to chew. Delicious, I murmured.
Zara smirked. Told you.
Then, she picked up her fork and took a bite. And the moment that bite hit her throat, I knew I had won. Zara chewed her food slowly at first, savoring the flavors, until she didn't. Her face twisted in confusion. I watched her carefully, my fork resting on my plate, my heartbeat steady. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker of discomfort crossed her expression. Her fingers trembled as she set the fork down. Ethan, she said, her voice suddenly unsteady. Something's wrong. Ethan looked up, his fork halfway to his mouth. What? Zara pressed a hand against her throat, her nails digging into her skin, as if she could claw away whatever was happening inside her. A slow, creeping redness spread across her face, like wildfire consuming dry leaves. Her breath hitched. My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with grim satisfaction. It was working. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to realization, and then panic. He shot up from his chair, knocking it over in the process. Zara? His voice cracked. Zara, what's wrong? I leaned back in my chair, calm and composed. I had seen this reaction before, on my own body. Painful blisters forming across the skin, swelling, the throat closing up. I knew exactly what she was going through. Zara clawed at the edge of the table, knocking over her glass of wine. Ethan, her words slurred, her voice a whisper of agony. Then she turned to me, her red, swollen eyes locked onto mine, realization dawning. You switched them, she wheezed. I tilted my head slightly, considering her words. Then I smiled. Yes, Zara, I did. Ethan's face drained of all color. His lips parted in shock, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. I could see the exact moment it hit him. His carefully crafted plan had completely backfired. Zara, don't move, Ethan stammered, scrambling for his phone. I'm calling for help. Zara gasped for air, her hands shaking violently as red welts and hives erupted across her arms and face. Ethan's fingers trembled as he tried to dial 911. But before he could, I pulled my own phone from my lap. I lifted the screen so he could see it. The recording was already running. Ethan's breath hitched. His entire body went still. I watched him as realization settled over him like a death sentence. What are you doing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I met his gaze, steady and cold. "Catching criminals," I said. Ethan's face twisted in sheer panic. His fingers clenched around his phone, but he hesitated. "Put that away, Ava," he said, his voice shaking but still trying to sound commanding. "You don't need to do this." I leaned back in my chair, tapping my finger against the screen of my phone. The red recording light blinked, casting a faint glow in the dimly lit dining room. Zara let out another wheezing gasp, her body trembling violently. Her hands clawed at her throat, her face now completely flushed, as if it were burning from the inside out. I looked directly at Ethan, my voice calm. "Tell me, Ethan, what exactly did you put in the food?" Ethan took a step back, his jaw clenching shut. His eyes flickered toward Zara, who was now leaning against the table for support, her breath coming in shallow, desperate gulps. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. I scoffed. "Oh, don't insult me, Ethan." I turned the phone slightly so the screen faced him, then pressed play. His own voice filled the room. "That wasn't supposed to be her plate." Ethan went still. Zara, despite her struggle to breathe, let out a low, strangled gasp. I rewound the recording and played it again, letting his words repeat. "That wasn't supposed to be her plate." Zara's swollen, red-rimmed eyes snapped to Ethan, the pain momentarily replaced by something else, betrayal. She understood now. Ethan had just confessed everything. "You idiot," she choked out, gripping the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Ethan's entire body stiffened. "Zara, shut up," he hissed through clenched teeth. But it was too late. Zara was losing control, her body succumbing to the violent allergic reaction. She was gasping, struggling to form words, and that made her desperate. "You swore it wouldn't be traced," she wheezed, her voice slurred, her hands gripping at her throat. "You said it would just make her sick. Too sick to go to court." Ethan's entire face froze in horror. And just like that, the final piece of their plan was revealed. They had never intended to kill me outright. They had poisoned the food just enough to send me into an allergic reaction severe enough to hospitalize me. If I had eaten that plate, I would have been too weak to fight back in court, too sick to prove their forgery. They wanted to remove me, permanently.
But now?
They had just admitted to everything. My finger hovered over the send button on my phone. I met Ethan's gaze one final time, watching as his entire world crumbled around him. Then, without a word, I pressed send. The recording was now backed up to multiple locations, my lawyer and the police.
There was no way out for them now.
In the distance, the faint wail of sirens began to fill the air. Ethan's breath hitched as he spun toward the window, his hands tugging at his hair in panic. Zara collapsed onto the chair, her swollen face streaked with sweat, her body shaking violently. And I just sat there, watching justice finally arrive. The siren wails grew louder, red and blue lights flashing through the large window of Zara's pristine dining room. Ethan froze, his entire body rigid with panic. His breath was coming in sharp, uneven gasps as his eyes darted from me to Zara, to the front door, and then back again, like a trapped animal searching for an escape. Zara, meanwhile, was struggling to even sit up. Her swollen face twisted in agony, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps as the allergic reaction continued to worsen. "Ethan," she whimpered, her voice nearly incoherent. He barely looked at her. His mind was already racing toward his next move. I lifted my phone again. "I've already sent the recording to my lawyer," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the chaos unfolding around me. Ethan's eyes snapped to me. "You," he started, his hands clenching into fists. His face contorted, rage flickering beneath his fear. But I stood my ground, unfazed. "That's right," I said smoothly. "The police already have everything. Every word you said, every confession. You're finished." Heavy footsteps pounded up the front steps. A loud banging rattled the front door. "Police, open up." Ethan flinched violently. For a second, I saw a flicker of pure terror in his eyes, the look of a man who knew he had lost everything. Then, in one desperate movement, he turned and bolted toward the back door.
Typical.
A coward until the very end. But before he could even reach the hallway, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. Several officers stormed inside, their weapons drawn. Freeze! Hands where we can see them. Ethan skidded to a stop, his hands half raised, his chest rising and falling rapidly. His entire body was shaking. The lead officer stepped forward. "Ethan Carter, you are under arrest for attempted poisoning, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Place your hands behind your head." Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting toward me one last time. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. For the first time, he knew exactly what it felt like to be powerless. Slowly, with trembling hands, Ethan lowered himself to his knees. The moment the officer cuffed his wrists, Zara let out a hoarse cry from across the table. She had finally collapsed, her body slumped against the chair. A paramedic rushed to her, checking her vitals. "Her throat is almost completely swollen shut," he reported. "She needs immediate transport." The officer gave a curt nod. "Take her." Two medics lifted Zara onto a stretcher, her body twitching from the allergic reaction, as they quickly wheeled her outside. And that was it. Ethan was dragged away in handcuffs, Zara taken away in an ambulance, and I stood in the middle of the crime scene, watching them disappear from my life for good. As the police secured the crime scene, one officer approached me. "Ms. Carter, your recording confirms your statement," he said. "Between this and the legal fraud charges, Ethan and Zara are looking at serious prison time." I let out a slow breath.
Good.
He nodded. "We'll take it from here. You should get some rest."
Rest.
For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I tilted my head up, staring at the dark sky. It was over. They had tried to steal everything from me, my company, my career, my life. But in the end, they had destroyed themselves. And I had survived. 3 months later, I sat in the center of a packed courtroom, my hands folded neatly on my lap. The air was heavy with tension, the sound of whispers weaving through the gallery as the trial of Ethan Carter and Zara Carter began. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, his once confident posture now replaced with stiff tension. His sharp suit, which he had always worn with arrogance, now looked ill-fitting on a man who had lost everything. Zara sat beside him, her face still scarred from the severe allergic reaction. Even after months of recovery, the damage was evident, permanent discoloration and raised scars running down the side of her cheek and neck. The physical proof of their crime would never fade. I should have felt satisfaction seeing them like this, weak, powerless. But all I felt was calm resolution. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. This court is now in session for the case of the state versus Ethan Carter and Zara Carter, charged with attempted poisoning, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and corporate sabotage. The prosecutor stood, walking confidently toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this is a case of greed, deception, and attempted murder. The defendants, Ethan and Zara Carter, did not simply want control of a company. They were willing to poison and incapacitate a woman to get what they wanted." She turned toward me, acknowledging my presence. "Ms. Ava Carter is alive today because she outsmarted them. But if she hadn't, well, we would be looking at an entirely different case." Ethan flinched.
Zara refused to look at me.
Then, the prosecutor pressed a button on her laptop. A familiar voice filled the courtroom. That wasn't supposed to be her plate. The jury members shifted in their seats, some shaking their heads, some glancing toward Ethan and Zara in disgust. Then, Zara's frantic voice played over the speakers. "You swore it wouldn't be traced. You said it would just make her sick. Too sick to go to court." A ripple of reaction spread through the audience. A woman in the front row gasped. And at the defendant's table, Ethan's head dropped into his hands. It was undeniable. They were guilty. Ethan's lawyer stood up, forcing a smile as he addressed the jury. "My clients deeply regret what has happened," he said, his voice measured. "But this was never an attempt to kill Miss Carter. They were simply trying to prevent a rushed corporate decision that they believed would harm the company." "Oh, so poisoning me was a business strategy now?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. The lawyer faltered. The jury members exchanged knowing looks. Ethan's defense had nothing.
And we all knew it.
After 3 days of trial, the jury returned their verdict. I held my breath as the judge read the statement. On the charges of attempted poisoning, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and corporate sabotage, we find the defendants. A long, heavy pause. Guilty on all counts. A sharp exhale left my lips. Ethan slumped in his chair, his mouth slightly open in shock. Zara let out a shaky, broken breath, her eyes darting wildly, as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape this time. The judge continued. "Given the premeditated nature of these crimes and the overwhelming evidence provided, this court finds it necessary to impose the maximum penalty allowed by law." I sat still, waiting. The judge's voice rang through the silent courtroom. "Ethan Carter, you are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Zara Carter, you're sentenced to 12 years in federal prison." A murmur spread through the courtroom. I turned to Ethan one final time. He lifted his gaze toward me, something hollow and broken in his eyes. Regret? Desperation? It didn't matter. I gave him nothing. He had chosen his path. And this was the end of it. The courtroom emptied slowly, people murmuring as they filed out. The weight of the verdict still hung in the air. I remained seated for a moment, watching as the officers secured Ethan and Zara's handcuffs, preparing to take them away. Zara looked stunned, as if she had never truly believed this would happen to her. Ethan, however, was different. He looked drained, his eyes dark and unreadable. But before they escorted him out, he turned toward me, his voice low. "Ava," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please." I tilted my head, waiting. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, his lips twitching slightly, as if debating what to say. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice raw. I didn't think it would go this far." A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. "That's the problem, Ethan," I said coldly. "You never thought at all." His eyes flickered with something, shame, regret, maybe even sorrow.
But it was too late for that.
The officer grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. As they led Ethan and Zara away, I finally let out a long breath. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the sky was clear and bright, an odd contrast to the storm I had just walked through. David, my lawyer, stood beside me. "It's done," he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. "They won't be able to appeal for at least 10 years. And even then, with the evidence we have, it won't matter." I nodded slowly. I had spent so long fighting for justice that I wasn't sure what to do now that I had won. But as I stepped forward, the realization settled over me. I was free. No more deceit. No more backstabbing. No more looking over my shoulder. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without fear. 1 year had passed since Ethan and Zara were sentenced. I stood on a large stage, facing a packed conference hall. My company had not only survived their betrayal, it had thrived. I had signed the biggest contract of my career, expanded internationally, and gained the trust of even stronger investors. As I stood in front of hundreds of young entrepreneurs, I smiled. "Success," I began, "isn't just about hard work. It's about resilience. It's about standing tall even when the people closest to you try to tear you down." The audience nodded, some taking notes, others listening intently. In business, as in life, the biggest threats don't always come from competitors, I continued. Sometimes, they come from the people you trust the most. A few people in the audience murmured in agreement. I never spoke about Ethan and Zara publicly. The media had covered the trial extensively, the poisoning attempt, the fraud, the betrayal, but I refused to let them define my story. Because, in the end, they weren't worth it. They had tried to take everything from me. Instead, they had pushed me further than I ever could have imagined. Later that evening, as I sat in my office, My phone buzzed with a new email notification. I opened it, skimming the contents. It was a news article. Ethan Carter and Zara Carter's first appeal had been denied. I stared at their names for a moment, feeling nothing. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction.
Just peace.
I closed the email and turned off my phone. Because real revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's proving you never needed them in the first place.